This episode of the show is brought to you from the Salesman.org HubSpot studio. Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman podcast.
Credibility, or whether or not a person has it or not, it determines who you trust for guidance. What do you look like when someone pulls up your LinkedIn profile? Is it sort of like a dating profile or something like that when they actually, oh, wow, that seems enticing. And when they actually, get to know you, whatever, you're nothing like what your profile says you are, and then the trustworthiness aspect of it is do you do what you say you're going to do?
Hello, Sales Nation. My name is Will Barron. I'm the host of the Salesman podcast, the world's most downloaded B2B sales show. On today's episode, absolute legend. I enjoyed this one. We have C. Lee Smith. He's the founder over at salesfuel.com. He's the author of the book Sales Cred. And on today's episode, we're diving into how the process buyers go through to qualify sellers. So usually we're talking about how salespeople qualify their potential customers, their prospects. We're flipping it on its head in this episode. We're getting into how buyers qualify sellers. There's a nice framework to follow to implement all of this. There's a ton of value in this episode, so let's jump right into it. C. Lee Smith, welcome to the Salesman podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you on. So we're going to dive into a topic today which we've covered in 700 odd episodes of the show. This is something that we rarely cover, and this is what I guess buyers want from sellers as opposed to what sellers try and push on and throw at buyers. So with that said, just to set up the scene here, because I want to look at how buyers qualify sellers, and if there's a process, if there's a hierarchy, if there's some way we can label some of this in a second. But just to set the scene, which is more important to a sale being completed from both sides? Is it how well a buyer qualifies is it how well a seller qualifies a buyer, or is it the inverse of that? How well a buyer qualifies the seller, or salespeople?
I think that's the appropriate question to ask. And I think that for so many of us, we have it exactly backwards, because I think we spend a lot of time talking about, do they fit our ICP? Will they buy enough to qualify as an enterprise level client? All these things. And the reality of it is that what's really most important is that, will we get qualified by the buyer? How does the buyer qualify the seller? That being me or you in this particular case. And because if we don't pass that test, we won't get the opportunity really, to qualify them or not, because they've already eliminated us from contention. They're already decided they're not going to return our emails. They're not going to reply to our emails or return our calls. They're not going to invite us to compete for the business. So it's really a moot point at that point.
Now, is this something that we're in control of? And what I mean by that is there'll be some of the audience listening goes, okay, the buyer has disqualified me, hands up, I'm off to the next individual. Or is there a level of control, is there a level of influence that we can sway on how a buyer qualifies us?
So we do a lot of research here at Sales Fuel. That's what we are. We're a sales research firm. And we've been ranked as one of the top 10 sales enablement providers by Selling Power magazine worldwide for 3 years running now. And it's because of our research. And so we've done research in this particular area, which we call the Selling to SMBs study, where we've surveyed business owners of small to medium-sized businesses, and so 57% of them will have already gotten down. They've already gotten through the majority of their purchase journey by the time they've even reached out to a salesperson. 57% of them will then research a salesperson online. They'll check out your LinkedIn profile. They'll do a Google search before they ever decide that they're going to reach out to you or communicate with you. Many times that they're filling out a form to get some free stuff, whether it be a white paper or some leads or some thought leadership that you've provided. But they're not going to give you that information unless that you've proven, or at least your company has, the value then to the buyer. And so if you're not doing that, you're not going to get invited to the party.
Sure. And I think in your language, you would describe this is how credible, or the credibility of the individuals that's being represented here. Is there a definition of what credibility means for you, for a salesperson?
So for me, credibility is all about your, it's whether or not credibility, or whether or not a person has it or not. It determines who you trust for guidance and information that you use to make decisions, in your everyday life. And the three pillars of credibility, you're familiar with know, like, trust. Well, it's being known, it's being liked, and being trustworthy. And So first of all, you have to be known. And so that's the part, going back to your earlier question, you absolutely have control over. Is that what do you look like when someone pulls up your LinkedIn profile? Is it sort of like a dating profile or something like that when they actually, oh, wow, that seems enticing. And when they actually, get to know you, whatever, you're nothing like what your profile says you are? Or is your profile all about, hey, I got this promotion. I've done great things here, I've done great things there, but it doesn't really speak anything to the buyer. That your profile is really designed more to get your next job than it is to win your next sale. And so my advisement then on the first level of sales credibility, and there is a hierarchy, and I'll be happy to share that with you, which is all about what the internet says about you. And the first thing that you can do then is to change your LinkedIn profile. So now you're speaking to your future customer, and the post that you're making and the credentials that you put up there reassure the buyer that you know what you're doing. You're not a job hopper, and you've advised and helped other people in similar situations, so that when they read that and then they get an email from you or a call from you or whatever, they will respond and you'll have an opportunity to compete for the business.
Well, we'll go into the hierarchy in a second, but just on this know, like, and trust, because this is hopefully will be very familiar with the audience. So the know element is you could just go and set your prospect's house on fire and they'd know you. So I think, or you could put a ton of ad spend down to one side and eventually they'd know you. So I don't think the know element is all that difficult to comprehend, wrap our heads around. Now, for the trust element, again, we know when we trust someone, it's a gut feeling, or even analytically, I know that I could probably trust Warren Buffett to give me investment advice. I don't necessarily need to like him or enjoy his company, but I'd probably trust it. If Warren Buffett rang me up on the phone, Lee, and said, hey, do this, this, and this, I'd put down the phone, I'd pause this interview, and I'd just get on with it and get it done. But
so you know Warren Buffett. You know of him, and you know of his business success and his business acumen. So you know that. You also know that he's not a terrible person. I mean, so it's like when it comes to being liked, it's like you don't hate Warren Buffett. You're not going to say, oh, if that guy calls me, I'm not thinking. And you could probably think of several names off the top of your head right now. If they called you, it doesn't matter how well known they are. It's like you're not taking the call.
Sure.
And then the trustworthiness aspect of it is do you do what you say you're going to do? And are you going to do right by people, all people? And those are the things that, can I believe what you're saying? And have you demonstrated that I can believe what you're saying? It's not just like, I'm going to trust you until I catch you in your first lie. Because if I catch you in your first lie, chances are it's probably your fifth or sixth lie, right? I just haven't caught you yet. So it's like, that's what being known, being liked, and being trustworthy is really all about in that context. So from your example, Warren Buffett is known. Warren Buffett is not disliked. I would say that he's liked, and he's certainly trustworthy because it's like he's not proven otherwise. He's demonstrated that trustworthiness through most of his business life.
So you took the words out of my mouth. So I was going to describe the likability of Warren Buffett with me, and this is obviously just random and anecdotal for the podcast. I'm sure he's a very nice guy, but it'd be neutral, right? So is neutral a good enough starting point to engage with buyers? As in, what I'm saying is, if we don't screw up, is that enough to generate conversations? And then we have to kind of trust they're giving us the opportunity not to screw up as we move forward.
Well, I think that's fair. I mean, I think starting out, I definitely think that's fair. I prefer then to really more look at, and sometimes the being known, being liked, and being trustworthy can be a little, open to subjectivity.
Yep.
And that's one of the reasons why I created the hierarchy of sales credibility then, because I think that puts a much finer point on it. And, so really what we're talking about here is what the internet says. So what does the internet say about Warren Buffett? Well, we all know. So it's like, okay, you can go there, you can Google search him, everything like that. You can see his thought leadership and everything like that. Okay, he passes the test. Next, it's what does Warren Buffett say? Does he speak intelligently? Is he relevant? Is he still relevant? Does he make me money? Does he understand business well enough to be able to help me? Certainly, yes. That's the second aspect of it. And we can get into the rest of it from there. But it's like I think that's a good basis that he has to be known. you don't hate him, and he hasn't demonstrated untrustworthiness at that point. It's a good starting point, but ultimately that's where we want to go is much higher up the pyramid of the sales credibility.
Sure. So we will go through each individually, but give us the summary. We've gone through 2 there. Tell us the other 3 elements of the pyramid.
So after that, it's not just what you say, but it's also how you say it. And this is where salespeople unknowingly trip themselves up on a regular basis by how they present themselves in email. They don't write an authoritative language, or they admit that they don't, or they don't show that they're knowledgeable, in the business area of the client, or they go on to a Zoom meeting and the background behind them or whatever, it looks like they belong on an episode of The Hoarders. It's like it's just it's like really it's like. Or there's all kinds of things behind them or whatever that have nothing to do with their ability then to solve problems and understand someone else's business point of view. So I think that those are some examples there. But it's not just what you say; it's what you do next. So you actually have to follow through, do what you say you're going to do, then do a little bit more. But the pinnacle of sales credibility and what we all strive for is what they say, and what they say is what your clients, what your prospects say about you. That is the pinnacle that we want to get to. But it's important to note that the hierarchy of sales credibility is not about personal brand. Personal brand is about who you are, it's how you put yourself out there and like that. You have a hierarchy of sales credibility for every single account and prospect that you have in contact with. So someone that you've worked with for 10 years might be totally thrilled with the work you've done for them and will give you that recommendation and those referrals and everything like that. While the next prospect of it doesn't know you from Adam, and they're going on and they're doing the Google search right now. So everyone has their own pyramid.
This is the pyramid, if I liken this to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So the bottom layer, we're going to survive, we're going to be okay. And then as we go through the different layers, we're going to become more happier, we're going to become more it's going to be more sustaining, it's going to be a nicer world or life to live in. Is this similar with regards to salespeople in their profession, in that if the internet doesn't say bad things about you, you might do a few deals. If you have at the very top of the pyramid, if you have tons of recommendations from previous customers and your organization is well represented and your buyers love the organization that you work for, does that mean that our life in sales becomes a nicer place to live?
It becomes really easy, really fast. I mean, and that's really, my company, multi-million-dollar company, how we built it up is by people leaving one organization that we've served very well, and they go to another organization, and we're one of the first people they call. And so it is all about that, and but you have to work for it. You don't necessarily ask for referrals; you have to earn referrals, and you have to do that again through the prior levels of the pyramid by what you've done for them, by what you said, how you said it. And, and then, of course, how you present yourself online as a thought leader and as someone that is very capable of being able to make sense of things and solve problems.
And it seems like we've got this personal pyramid, and then there's perhaps a pyramid with the same topics and same titles for the organization that we work for. Is that fair to say?
I think that's totally fair that the company you work for then also has their own pyramid. So, and I think it's a parallel pyramid, I guess. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that when someone's researching you as a salesperson, you're representing that company. So they don't necessarily make the distinction between the salesperson and the company. If you're a salesperson for Xerox, then whatever they think about Xerox is going to be transferred to you. And likewise, it's like, if they go online and they find some things in there that are unsavory and you're a representative of Xerox, then Xerox is going to be tarnished by that.
Because the reason I asked that is, in my medical device days, when I worked selling endoscopy products, I only ever worked for the best companies in the business, right, in the space. And a lot of what we're describing here happened to me organically just because I could get the meetings, I could see the surgeons, I could do the deals, which then got me the referrals, got me that credibility, all on the back of me not really knowing what I was doing, but working for a great company. So which is, if someone was new to sales or someone's looking for a change, Lee, which would be the best approach? Would it be to really double down on their own personal pyramid, or would it be a little bit of a shortcut perhaps to get into an enterprise that people love the brand behind?
Well, I think it's both, but I would say this is like, if you get in with a really good company and everything like that, it's up to the whim of the company whether or not you work for them or not. And so if all of your credibility is wrapped up in the credibility of the company, and then all of a sudden the company decides, oh, we've had COVID, need to have layoffs, or we've had a down quarter, and we're going to have to restructure things or whatever. Yeah. So the neat thing about your personal credibility is like you take that with you wherever you go. And you have those business relationships wherever you go. So then if you are no longer with Xerox and now you're going over to Fujitsu now or something like that, well, the relationships that you have and the credibility you build up for each one of those accounts go with you.
And
whereas
was this even possible 15 years ago, or is this only enabled because of the internet age that we live in?
Well, I think the credibility has always been an issue. It's like so many sales podcasts that I listen to, not nearly as good as yours, mind you, but I was hoping for a spit take there, but it didn't quite happen.
Nearly. I think
you are a true pro.
It came out my nose a little bit, if I'm being real, if I'm being honest with you.
But I hear a lot of talk about trust. And it's something that as salespeople we all aspire to is to be a trusted advisor and to win the trust of the account. Great. How do I do that? Mm-hmm. If you want to earn trust, you need to start by building credibility with that particular account or prospect, because you can't have trust unless you have credibility. You can have credibility and no trust, but you can't have trust without credibility. So credibility then is why I wrote the book Sales Cred. And, it's why I'm so passionate about this topic.
Yeah, that's why I love this framework. It's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, Lee, because we've had people to come on the podcast a bunch, probably 30 times to talk about trust as a concept. Now, as a concept, it's easy to understand. I trust that you're not going to say something horrific on this podcast now that means we scrap the whole show and we have to kind of redo it or not redo it. I trust the ceiling isn't going to fall down on me and crush me, and it'd probably make a great show and it might go viral, but it would not be very productive.
But you can only do it once.
Yeah, it's a one-trick pony. But how to quantify and qualify trust, and then it's not even my trust; it's the trust of someone else. I feel it's very difficult. It's a difficult topic to really nail down and make practical. But these steps of what the internet says, what you say, how you say it, what you do, and what they say, it's a very clear framework to kind of put trust into action to implement a lot of this. How did you come up with this framework? Is this just purely experience? Did you do research and leverage that research as to, I don't know, you're asking questions of what is the most important thing, trust perspective from the buyers? How did you come up with the framework itself?
Yeah, all of the above. I mean, it's 35 years of experience. It's advising sales staffs that are doing it the right way and doing it the wrong way. Seeing my own staff do things right way and the wrong way, and advising them. But also then a lot of research behind it. Very data driven, always have been. That's why the company is what it is. And so we have research that we've done where we've surveyed sales managers, we've surveyed salespeople, and we've surveyed buyers. And we asked them all the same questions, and basically what it comes down to is like there's a list of there's some do's and don'ts of things that will lose you the deal with buyers, but there's some things then that that sales managers get frustrated with their sales managers and vice versa. And so it is all that knowledge wrapped up then and then we also have to keep it current and updated, because as you've seen, it's like the sales world has changed considerably in the last year and a half, more than it has the previous 10. And so we have to continuously do this research and continuously have these conversations with people just to make sure that we're staying ahead of the curve.
What I find fascinating, though, is that sales has changed. It was never going to go back. A lot of the change perhaps was coming, but COVID has just knocked it forward and accelerated things. I'm holding back from using all kinds of cliches here as I describe that, because I'm sick of hearing about digital transformation, right? But what we're describing here, a lot of this is very fundamental and probably will never change. There's a VP over at HubSpot who, the quote is along the lines, and he quoted this in a PR, a PR thing that went out to like thousands of websites and a press release. And literally, it's like, Will Barron, it's a no-brainer not to do business with Will Barron or something like that. So I copied that quote. And that quote from that VP, his name's Kieran, I'm sure he won't mind me talking about him on the show. I've won hundreds of thousands of dollars of business on that one quote alone, because that's what someone else is saying about me. That's what a company like HubSpot, who's well respected, is saying about me as an individual. That would have worked 20 years ago, 50 years ago. It's probably going to work 20 years into the future as well, isn't it? Is there anything else in particular about this hierarchy, about building credibility that is timeless?
Well, the other thing is that you reminded me of something that my friend and mentor Jeffrey Gitomer, likes to say. He says that if you say it, it's bragging. If they say it, it's proof. And so what's changed a little bit is that bottom layer, that base level, which is right now, which is what the internet says. In the past, before 1995, for example, it was, but that's your reputation. So it's like, what do they say about you at the Rotary Club? What do they say about you at the athletic club? But the thing is, like back then, that word of mouth traveled much more slowly and got around, whereas now it's instantaneous. If someone's going to put something online, a lot more people know about it a lot more quickly. And that's the big difference here, is that it's all accelerated. It's pretty much the same framework as it has been for decades, but now everything is much more accelerated and much more prominent and easy for people to see.
Okay, well, let's get practical here, and I'll link to obviously the book and everything else in the show notes of this episode. But I'll also I'll either pinch one of yours if you've got one that's annotated that we can borrow, or I'll draw one of our own to show the hierarchy in the show notes for anyone who wants to see it specifically as we go through it. What the internet says, the bottom level of the hierarchy, we've covered that a million times on the show. LinkedIn profiles, just your own PR, searching your own name in Google and seeing what comes up, removing any ridiculous pictures off Facebook that are public. Let's leave that one behind for a second. Now, what you say and how you say it, how are they separate? Are they not the same thing?
They are separate because are you providing relevant value to the client? I mean, to the prospect even, but even before, without reciprocity, it's like, so, what can I provide to you that's going to help your business, that's going to give you a little bit of insight that perhaps you didn't know, so that there's value in knowing me. Mm-hmm. So the worst thing that you can possibly say as a salesperson is to go in to an office or to have a video call, even an email, and say, tell me about your business today. Really? Because the buyer has already researched you. They know all about you. They know about your company. They know about your product. And what you're saying is, I'm too lazy to actually do a simple Google search even to find out anything about your business. And there are databases that you can buy. We sell one that provides you all kinds of category insight. Of course, you can then get lead gen data and everything like that from countless numbers of places. There's no excuse for you asking the question, tell me about your business today. And immediately when you do that, that's one of the things that salespeople do that immediately give away their credibility. So it's a matter of, instead of saying that, saying, well, here's what some of my other clients have been telling me, blah, 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 blah. It's like, is that what you're seeing? Or how is that affecting you? Now, all of a sudden, then it's like, one, I've said, oh, I have other clients that I work with. I have other clients that I work with in your line of business. And I have a bit of insight from what they're telling me. It's like, how does that compare with what you're seeing? What's going to happen is they're either going to feel reassured that, oh, well, okay, other people are going through the same thing I'm going through. Maybe I can be a little less anxious about it or whatever and get about solving it. Mm-hmm. Either that, or it's like you're going to provide some insight to them that perhaps they hadn't heard before and hadn't thought about. And now all of a sudden they're kind of tuned in and now again, value in knowing you. So it's what you say, but you can be brilliant, and be a genius and provide great insight, great research and great analysis and great help. But, if you're a jerk, about how you say it, or, or let's say that you're one of these sales consultants out there and you're talking about, hey, I can 10x and I don't mean to say 10x because I don't want to single that guy out because he's a very capable guy. But I can multiply your sales and everything like that and lead you to a better life and everything like that. And meanwhile, though, he's wearing a suit then that looks like it came off the discount rack, and a beat up pair of shoes and driving 15-year-old car. I'm going, really? I'm supposed to trust that you can lead me to great prosperity when you don't seem to be demonstrating that yourself. So, again, it's also about, on how you say is like, act like you've been there before. Act like you've done a Zoom call or a Skype call before, that you've written CEOs and C-level people in your emails, and that when you leave a voicemail message that you've done that before and you're not fumbling around and meandering all over the place. It's like, get in, do the business, get out, act like you've been there before. And then that's how what you say then also gives them greater reassurance than that they're dealing with a true professional.
It's I will put you on the spot. It's funny that you may or may not have mentioned Grant Cardone, because one of my most popular posts on LinkedIn of all time was essentially what you were not with Grant, but alluding to it in a wider circumstance there. Of it was, I think I mentioned Grant in the post, but it was essentially all these sales trainers who say that they're going to 10x, 100x, they're going to make you a millionaire, all these kind of things. Why is there only Grant that has a private jet? Now, of course, Grant's doing other things, and he's a
great real estate guy. Yeah.
So he's a fan of the show. He's a friend of the show, and he's doing all kinds of other things which drive a ton of revenue. Right? I think he would agree that his sales training isn't kind of funding a private jet and all that kind of stuff. But why is it that all these people can seemingly do all of these things, but you're right, they're driving tatty cars, they look scruffy, and people have different styles, so you don't have to wear a suit to be kind of incredibly wealthy. But you're making all these claims, and you're clearly not able to do it for yourself. So I'll link to that in the show notes as well. That was literally, I think it had like 250,000 views on it, and it went viral, all because of this idea. And there's very few salespeople or very few sales trainers who commented on it and got in the chat. So that was a question that I know I just wanted to double down on, because I know the wider audience and my audience have questioned that in the past as well. But with that all said, earlier on, and I guess this is the kind of part of the hierarchy that we're talking about here, you mentioned this term thought leadership. So how important is it? Because I feel like there's two roads we can go down here, Lee. There's thought leadership. We're going to write a book. I'm going to have my own methodology. I'm going to teach something that is new, or is a new twist on things. There's a new idea. I'm going to change a paradigm of the people around me. Do we need to go down that route, or do we need to just have really useful, actionable insights for our audience, for our little bubble of potential customers?
So I don't. Let's say that I'm selling restaurant supplies. Do the restaurants that run a business care that I wrote a book or something like that? No, but it's like on the other hand, though, the fact that I was able to write a book and get it published, whatever, says something about me that I'm knowledgeable in the area. But if my book is about fly fishing, it has nothing to do with how to help restaurants make more money, and then I don't care. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're much better off than guesting on a podcast, or it's even better than writing something yourself is to have somebody else write about you. Being a guest on somebody else's show, being a guest speaker at somebody else's meeting, getting quoted by somebody else, cited as a source. That's even more credible. And so being able to do those types of things is much more relevant. Again, it's all about relevant value. So it's like the fact that I wrote a book or I developed a methodology. Unless it's relevant to my business and helping me solve problems or achieve my goals, I don't care. I think it's great. I think it does help your credibility, but if it's relevant, now it really helps your credibility.
Sure, and I guess it comes into the next element of what you do. A crappy book isn't going to help anyone's credibility, right? If you say you're going to do something, you build the PR around doing something, and then you fail to do it, as in your book has 100 one-star reviews on Amazon, some of this can backfire, right? You
have to have a commitment to excellence, a high quality orientation, everything that you do. And it's better, quite frankly, to do a few things well than to try to do everything and do it half-assed. So one of the areas in which I see this happening is social media. People, I got to be everywhere. I got to be on TikTok now. Yeah. I got to be on Clubhouse now. It's like, all right, be one or two places or whatever where it matters, where your prospects can find you. They're already looking at you on LinkedIn. Maybe start there, certainly. But it's like you don't have to be everywhere and do a half-assed job. And it's better just to pick one or two areas or whatever and really hone in and do that exceptionally well, so that when they work with you, or when they research you, whatever, they see this is somebody that actually has a high commitment to quality, that does things really well. That's somebody I want to associate with, and maybe somebody that can help me.
It's so smart. I wish you would have told me. I wish you would have told me like 4 or 5 years ago, Lee, because we went everywhere. We did everything. To be frank, we did a lot of it half-assed. Our Instagram profile, I think it's like nearly 20,000 subscribers or kind of followers, and I've not updated it in like a year because nobody cares. It gets barely any engagement, and there's definitely no leads that have ever come from it. So we're just publishing to entertain people as opposed to generating leads, and we're not talking about If you are a professional athlete, maybe there is value in those things because sponsorships can be based on the back of your social media following and that side of things. But for the not average salesperson, but the salesperson who's aspiring to be excellent at their craft, LinkedIn and maybe some kind of podcast, YouTube channel, something like that, where you can you're in control of the ability to share your expertise. That's all we need, isn't it?
But the expertise really needs to be, again, relevant to your prospects. So if I'm selling to bicycle shops, then it's like, guess what? I should be posting about bicycling and bicycle retailing and trends in the industry and trends, with bicyclists, what they're looking for and everything like that, because that's really what's going to resonate and matter to people. And I do the same thing with my podcast too. Manage Smarter. We've been doing it for 4 years, and it's really for sales managers. And I would say that anyone listening to this show is a salesperson. It's a great idea just to kind of tune into that, just to kind of hear what's the language of the sales manager? What are they concerned about? What are they thinking about? And so because someday you might want to be one, but guess what? You're always going to, if not, you're going to work for one. It's really great just as you need to understand who your customer is, you also need to know then, who your boss is as well. And it's some great insight, but we do it for the same reasons. Like we don't get a ton of leads from it or anything like that. We're not trying to build, a 500 million, audience or anything like that. It's more important that what we do really well. And, and the people that listen in love it.
For sure. And I think you're a great case study of this. Perhaps tell me if I'm wrong, but if you're selling to sales managers and you do a podcast where people your customer sales managers or sales leadership tune in, and they are proactively consuming you, then that trust gets built over time. I can't remember who said this. Someone said it on the show a few years ago, and they were being somewhat flippant about it. But I think there might be something to it in that they were saying that a lot of trust is just impressions. You trust your parents because you see them every day, over. You trust, I don't know, Oprah, whoever it is, because they're on the media, they're in front of you on screen just so often. There's an element of you might think they're an idiot, but maybe trust isn't the right word, but that knowing element kind of pays dividends just via impression.
I got to push back on that. I'm not sure I buy that, because like I could think of a couple politicians, that in recent memory or whatever that were, everywhere, every single day and everything like that. And it doesn't mean that they were credible, just because they had a lot of impressions. So
fair enough.
Oprah, Oprah is like, when she puts out something, she doesn't put out crap. I mean, she puts out, good quality stuff, whether you like it or not. That's, again, everyone's going to have their own judgment about that. But it's like, the production quality is always good. She's interviewing people that people care about and are interested in. And, she's a really good business person and, fantastic as a media person. So, again, she's doing things with excellence. So if you combine that excellence and that relevance, then with the number of impressions, so it's not a quality versus quantity thing. It's a quality and quantity thing when it comes to being credible as a salesperson or any profession, really. I don't believe it's just impressions that'll get the job done.
Sure. I think what you said is very fair. I think there's a layer between us we can probably add and maybe agree on here that if what you're doing is crap, you've not got the opportunity for the next impression. So you've got to be doing good content for then someone to choose to consume you. Whereas maybe 40 years ago, you could just pay a crap load of money. And this is what all these big household brands blew up, right? Because they could just advertise on TV. There was 4 channels, 7 channels, and they'd be capturing hundreds of or tens of millions of people at a time. So you're totally right. I will use that example moving forward. But perhaps it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you create good content, then you earn those impressions over time, and then those impressions build up, and perhaps that leads to trust.
Yeah, and that's why I used the pyramid then as the model then for the hierarchy of sales credibility, because each level or each builds upon each other. And if you're not going to get the opportunity to actually have anything to say to a prospect, then if what the internet says about you is like, oh, you've got a lousy reputation or you're a nobody, then you're not going to get that opportunity even for the rest of the pyramid to even matter. Yeah, but it builds upon each other.
And I think it's also fair to say, perhaps, that if we're talking about Trump as a politician, I don't know if you were specifically, but I'm going to talk about him.
I kind of was.
Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth. From outside looking in, I can be somewhat neutral about this. Well, some people think he's an idiot. Some people would follow him into a insurrection, into political buildings and go crazy, right? So, the trust kind of, maybe what we want is the gray area in the middle of this person says, most of the time they say good things. Sometimes they say things that we need to discuss. But, he's obviously gone down that specific route, and he's got 50% of the nation think he's an idiot, and 50% do trust him and do follow him. I think that's fair to say as well.
Yeah, and I think that history is littered with leaders and politicians and everything like that had a big voice, had the big megaphone and used it often. And you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Yeah. And that's and the other thing too is immediately then these days then too, this is also important to note is relevance. If you have a hater or two or something like that, it's only because people see that you're out there and you're putting yourself out there. And I prefer to do business with humans. And humans make mistakes. Humans need to apologize now and then. And myself, and believe me, it's I do it on a regular basis. So, I forgot where I was going with that, but that was just, it's really you're going to have haters because you're putting yourself out there and you're out there so frequently. So people immediately are going to want to be skeptical about that, and that's okay. That's okay. It's so you're going to have to answer that, and you're going to have to deal with that. But also, how you deal with that also says a lot about you.
For sure. And it's self-accountability, it's your self-esteem. There's multiple layers to all this, which we'll get into on another show, because I'd love to have you back on, Lee, to dive into this. And we didn't even touch on the mindset side of things, which I did want to dive into. So I'll be back on in the future. But with that, tell us about the book and tell us more about Sales Fuel, and where we can find out more about yourself.
Well, you can learn more about me at cleesmith.com. That's the first initial C, and then leesmith.com. That's all about me. My company is salesfuel.com. You can go there. My book is it's right here. It's Sales Cred: How Buyers Qualify Sellers. It's a quick read, and it's designed then for busy people then to actually be able to go through and basically it's almost like reading a Twitter feed, really, all rolled up. But also explains then the hierarchy of sales credibility. A lot of tips, a lot of insight then on how salespeople give away their credibility and some of the things that they do and say, and how they say it, and how that gives away the credibility instead of building it. And so it can be a negative as well as a positive. And and you can get that book pretty much anywhere where you buy books, whether it be Amazon, it's an international bestseller, Barnes and Noble, any other places where you buy books, you'll be able to find it there. And I'm working on the audiobook right now on that, so that'll be coming out very shortly. And then at Sales Fuel, check out some of our SaaS-based products that we have for salespeople. And great stuff there, including we're launching a training program then for Sales Cred to help people out, and we're evaluating then what the internet says about you and some of the language that you use and helping grading that and giving you some advice on that.
Amazing stuff. I'll link to Sales Cred, Sales Fuel, everything else that we talked about in this episode of the show over at salesman.org. And with that, Lee, I want to thank you for your time. I genuinely enjoyed the conversation, mate, and I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman podcast.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.